Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to the talk Reminiscing Girish Karnad, organized by the Department of English, Jyotinivas College Autonomous. Let us begin with a short prayer invoking God's blessings on all of us. Thank you, Veronica. Resource person for today, Shri K M Chaithanya, award-winning documentary filmmaker and theatre personality. Our chief patron and principal Dr. Sister Lalita Thomas, who may join us shortly for a few minutes. Faculty from other departments who have so graciously joined us for today's event. Our technical team, who are the mainstay for online events and yet remain behind the scene, in this case, literally behind the laptop screen. Students from other streams with a love for theatre who have logged in with us, my dear department members, and my very dear literature students. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the inaugural event in the English department's calendar of events, a talk on renowned playwright and Gnanapith awardee, India's highest literary honor, actor, director, filmmaker, eminent theatre personality, one of the most renowned sons of our very own Karunadu, Girish Karnad. And it is befitting that our resource person for today to talk on Karnad should be a person who has lived and worked closely with Karnad, who has made an award-winning documentary on Karnad for Central Sahitya Academy, and who has rich experience and expertise in the directorial field, Shri K M Chaithanya. I'm sure Shri Chaitanya's insights into Girish Karnad's multifaceted life will enrich our literature students' reading and understanding of Girish Karnad's life and works, whose play Hayavadana they study in the 4th semester as part of their Indian literature paper. We are indeed fortunate, sir, to have you address and enlighten our students on Karnad. If I may add a personal touch, I am an avid watcher of Zee Kannada TV channel. I saw you on Zee Kannada a few days ago being honored by Zee Kannada on the occasion of their 15th anniversary celebrations. I was so happy and told myself and my family who were watching the show with me that this is the person whom we are inviting to our college, albeit online, to talk to our girls. On behalf of all of us at Jyoti Nivas, sir, I extend to you a very warm welcome. May I now call upon, thank you, sir. May I now call upon my colleague, Ms. Naureen Aziz, to introduce you to our students and tell us more about your professional life and career. Ms. Naureen.
Good afternoon. I quote, "A single tusk destroyer of incompleteness, we pay homage to you and start our play." Girish Karnad's Hayavadana. Our speaker for today, or shall I say Bhagavata for today, is no stranger to Jyoti Nivas College. He has come as chief guest for the student film release earlier and speaker for 2 of our national seminars in the past. K M Chaithanya is best known for his cult classic in Kannada cinema, Aa Dinagalu. The film won the prestigious Filmfare Award for South for Best Director and Best Film. That same film also won the award for South Indian Cinematographers Association and the Best Debut Director by Chennai Film Fans Association. Since then, Chaithanya has directed many films: Surya Kanti, Parari, Atagara, Ake, and Amma, I Love You. He has excelled in various genres, and such as action, comedy, emotional drama, horror. Ake won the Times of India KAFTA Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. Besides film, Chaithanya has had the distinction of directing Girish Karnad's play Bikhre Bim with the stalwart playwright himself. The play featured renowned actor Arundhati Nag in the lead and won the Meta National Award for Best Director and Best Play. Chaithanya has directed many documentaries for television programs for international networks such as CNN and BBC. His Back to the Flow won the Indian Television Academy Award for Best Business Series in 2004. Chaitanya's documentary on cancer stories was distributed to 2,500 patients of cancer by the British National Health Service. This talented director has adapted many classics from Kannada literature like Kusuma Bale to television. From literature to art forms, Chaithanya has also directed a documentary on the art form Yakshagana for Central Sangeet Natak Academy for submission to UNESCO under the Intangible Cultural Heritage Series. It is indeed an honor that we have Chaithanya here today as our resource person. He will now share with us his documentary, Scattering Golden Feathers, on the life and works of his mentor, Girish Karnad, who enabled Chaithanya to follow his own voice. Over to Chaithanya.
Good afternoon, and I made this documentary for the Central Sahitya Academy. In 2010, the Karnataka State Information Department asked me to make a documentary on Girish Karnad. And at that time, I shot with Mr. Karnad extensively. I took him to his hometown. I took him to Dharwad, and we shot in Bangalore. I've been working with Mr. Karnad from 1996. So I had all these stories that he had told me. And so when they asked me to make a documentary, I made him narrate those stories because Karnad is such a articulate and such a good narrator. So I made him narrate those stories himself. And after I finished the Kannada documentary, 3 years later, the Central Sahitya Academy asked me to make a documentary in English. Now, when I was shooting the Kannada documentary itself, I realized that it is difficult to get Mr. Karnad's time very easily. So when I was shooting with him, I shot the documentary in both Kannada and English. Each take was taken twice. And then 3 years later, when the Central Sahitya Academy asked me to make a documentary, I asked Mr. Vivek Shanbag, who's another very eminent writer. I asked him to do an extensive 1.5 hour interview with Mr. Karnad. So I combined what I had shot 3 years ago and what I shot with Mr. Vivek. And this documentary, as you can see, has very little of narration or anything else. It is essentially Mr. Karnad talking about himself. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll speak more about the documentary after this.
ನಾನು 16-17 ವರ್ಷದವನಿರುವಾಗ ಈ ಒಂದು ಹುಚ್ಚು ಹಿಡಿತು ನನಗೆ. ಅದಂತಂದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಚಿತ್ರಗಳನ್ನು ಬಿಡಿಸಿ, ಇದು TS ಎಲಿಯಟ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು, ಇದನ್ನು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕಳಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತಿದ್ದೆ. ಅವ್ರ ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ಆಟೋಗ್ರಾಫ್ ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಆಟೋಗ್ರಾಫ್ ಮಾಡಿ ತಿರುಗಿ ತಗೋತಿದ್ದೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಸಾಧಾರಣ 17-18ನೇ ವಯಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಅದನ್ನು ಶಾನ್ ಒಕೀಸಿ ಅಂತ ಒಬ್ಬ ಐರಿಷ್ ಪ್ಲೇ ರೈಟಿಗೆ ಕಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ಟೆ. ಅವರು ತಿರುಗಿ ಕಳಿಸಿ, ಯಾಕೆ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ನೀನು ಟೈಮ್ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಆಟೋಗ್ರಾಫ್ ಕಲೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊತಾ, ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ನೀವು ಉಳಿದವ್ರು ನೀನು ಆಟೋಗ್ರಾಫ್ ತೊಗೊಳೋದು ಮಾಡು ಅಂತ ಬರೋದು. ನನಗೆ ಹೌದು ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸ್ತು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನಾನು ಸ್ಟಾಪ್ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ಟೆ.
This is a familiar sight to make Karnad sets out on his morning walk. Karnad has traversed many paths as actor, director, thinker, and administrator, leaving his unique footprint in many fields. His most significant contribution has been to theatre. Karnad is ranked among the greatest playwrights in Indian literary history.
It was only when I was 16 that I realized a very important thing about my family, which was that my mother was a child widow, and that she had a son, and that she had become a nurse and met my father and got remarried again, and that we were children of her second marriage. But we were always brought up to believe that our eldest brother, Bhalchand, was a sibling. We were never told that he was a half brother. My mother had a very strong influence on me, on all of us, for two reasons. One thing, because she had struggled, she was very liberal, sexually. Liberal in the way she helped widows, the way she brought up women. I remember that when I was about 35 and so on, a woman who was a cook in our house, wrote me a love letter saying, I love you, what can I do, and so on and so on. So I put it in my drawer and went away to shoot, and when I came back, there was no letter. So I said to my mother, there was a letter, I had a letter here, I put it here, it has disappeared, what's to be done? So she said, oh, you mean that letter written by that girl? Yes, at that age, all girls feel like that. Why are you keeping that letter? Are you going to blackmail her? And she tore it up. She said. That was the end of that. She and my father were both great theatre enthusiasts. They had seen in Maharashtra, because my father traveled around Maharashtra, plays by Balagandhar, plays by Keshavrao Bhole, Marathi theatre. They loved Marathi theatre. Both used to see them, and I grew up with them telling me how glorious theatre was. My father was in government service, and he retired in 1942-43 from Pune. But the war was on, so he was given an extension. And there was an extension, he had to go to Sirsi, which was then considered a malarial post. Because Sirsi had no electricity. It was in the backwoods, it was in the jungles. And one used to see Yakshagana, or one used to see company nataks and occasionally a film. But otherwise, the only entertainment was stories. It was a world full of stories. And I learnt all my Puranas, all my Itihasa from those few years in Sirsi. Whatever I learnt about theatre, I imbibed from the Havya community, I think. From being with them, from doing plays with them, from acting with them, seeing, going to Yakshagana with them, the whole lot. This is Saraswatpur. My father, when he came to Dharwad in 1952, he came and took a house here. And since then, I've had a very close connection with Saraswatpur. When we came here in 1952, There were 51 Saraswat houses with Saraswat families and 51 outhouses with Saraswat families. So this whole area was a kind of prosperous Saraswat ghetto. The Saraswats were and are an educated community, which was fortunate for me. And they believed, although they all worked under the British, they believed that India should have independence, that Indians should lead themselves, and that there was need for social reform. Mahatma Gandhi came here, for instance. He lived in this house. I own this house today, but and I'm very proud that Mahatma Gandhi slept in one of the rooms here. Dr. Ambedkar came here, and he stayed in another house. That kind of stuff. And Dharwad was considered the cultural capital of North Karnataka. This is the Basel Mission School. I was a student here for 2 years after I came to Dharwad. And from here I went on to Karnataka College. A great school. There are a lot of buildings here now, inevitably. The houses are being built. You can see there that a lot of new houses have come. But when I used to come here in 1957, that was exactly 50 years ago, there was nothing here except the Someshwar temple and the tank. Unforgettable moments in my life. This is the Someshwara temple. It's quite old actually, and people believe that it was built by Jakanacharya, which shows how old it is, which means they don't know who built it. And this is the temple tank. I learned my swimming here. I used to come here at 5:36 in the morning, often without telling my father, who used to be very worried. Bendre has a famous poem, Bantanna Sanna Somara. Bantanna Sanna Somara, Kanadekanna Someshwara. The festival of Sanna Somara has come and we must now see Someshwara. And this is the Someshwara temple. To anyone interested in literature, whether he was a resident of Dharwad or a visitor to Dharwad, a visit to Bendre's house was a must. In those days, of course, no one took any appointment. We just turned up, and Bendre never minded it. Bendre has a poem, Baro Sadhana Kerige, come to Sadhana Kere. That was the area in which he lived, and he welcomed us. Then he would come and he would talk to us for half an hour, 45 minutes. And at the end of it, he would call his son and he would say, Bara Sakrataro. Bara would bring sugar, he would be given sugar, which was a sign of saying goodbye. And then we would go back feeling utterly rejuvenated by this exposure to Bendre's genius. This is Karnataka College. I was here for 4 years, from 1954 to 1958. I did my BA here with mathematics. For all those 4 years, I had Professor V.K. Gokak as the principal. He was a marvelous principal, a marvelous teacher. So to be here was really an intellectual honor, a pleasure. In those days, it was considered fashionable among students of the college to indulge in literary creativity, to write poems, to write essays, to write short stories and so on. It may be that people like V.K. Gokak themselves were writers and therefore inspired the people. But among those who were with me, the person who influenced my life most was Kirtinath Kurtkote. He was much older than me. I was about 18 and he was about 30. The reason was that he had been unable to continue his education after he did his BA. He did his BA at about 20, then he taught in Gadag because he had no money, and he came to Dharwad when he was around 28 and stayed with G.B. Joshi and continued his education. And this was the one great advantage I had. Through him, I got to know G.B. Joshi. I got to enter Manohar Granthmala, which was a great honor in those days. This is Subhash Road. And in Dharwad, when I was young, Marathi was used as much as Kannada. It had the same kind of currency. And we spoke both the languages in the marketplace here, actually. And Subhash Road was the road where everyone came for a walk in the evening, particularly college students. The boys came and the girls came, and we all walked pretending not to look at each other, but of course looking at each other. Most important to me, the most important point in Subhash Road was Manohar Granthmala. Here, they were my publishers. They made me the writer that I am today. YN Krishnamurthy, who was the editor of Prajavani and then the editor of Kannada Prabha, used to say that Manohar Granthmala taught Kannada readers to read Kannada literature. In the 1930s, when there was hardly any Kannada literature, Manohar Granthmala took the lead in publishing good literature. They created whole body of readers for Kannada literature and published writers like Ernakru, like Gokak, and made modern literature possible. And you see, Manohar Granthmala was my other home in Dharwad. One home was my own home, where my parents were there. But I always used to come so that I could spend time here with Kirti and GB, because I learnt my language here. I learnt my literature here. I learnt about Sanskrit drama here. I mean, the amount I've learnt is quite extraordinary. Kirti's conversation was like a machine gun fire, you know. Bright ideas used to keep on coming from all directions. And if you're there, you try quickly to grab an idea, see what you could do with it. Another man whom I met here was A.K. Ramanujan, who would come here. Then there were people like Shankar Mukashi Punekar, and Bendre used to come here. And this was a great crucible for ideas, a very exciting place to be in. And I benefited enormously from it. I did my BA here with mathematics. Actually, I had no love for mathematics. In fact, I hated the subject. But then I was dying to go abroad. In fact, in that generation, everyone wanted to go abroad. Probably they still do. And there was no way my father could send me, because he didn't have that means to do so. So to go abroad, I had to get a scholarship. To get a scholarship, I had to get a first class. And I decided that by taking Kannada or history or English, I could not make sure that I would get a first class. The only way I could make absolutely sure that I would get a first class was by studying mathematics. So I took mathematics, I got my first class, I stood first to the university, and I got the Rhodes Scholarship. So in a way, my the idea of taking mathematics bore fruit. But now when I look back, I think it was a very good idea, because mathematics taught me a discipline. Mathematics gives you a rigor. It lets you think of various factors in a very logical fashion. And if you want to be a playwright, that kind of training is immensely useful. But if I took the Rhodes Scholarship, in those days, you know, you couldn't fly. You had to take a ship. I had to go by 3 weeks. My father didn't have enough money to pay me back, so I would come back after 3 years. So there was chaos at home. Will he stay there? Will he marry a white woman? And so on and so on. And the parents were demanding, no, you come back to India. And I felt these people are making demands on me. All that seemed suddenly coming to life in the story of Yayati and his demands on Puru. You know, you sacrifice your youth for me, and so on. And suddenly the whole thing poured out as a play.
ನೀನು ಅವಳ ಅಭಿಮಾನವನ್ನು ಕೆಣಕಿದೆ. ಈಗ ಅವಳಿಗೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಧ್ವಂಸದಲ್ಲೂ ತನ್ನ ವಿಜಯದ ಅನುಭವವಾಗುತ್ತಿದೆ. ನಿನ್ನ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಹಿಂಸೆಯಲ್ಲೂ ತನ್ನ ಪರಾಕ್ರಮದ ಸಂವೇದನೆಯಾಗುತ್ತಿದೆ. ನಾನು ಈ ಆಟವನ್ನು ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಲಿಕ್ಕೆಂದು ಬಂದೆ. ಆದರೆ ನಾನು ಈ ಆಟದಲ್ಲಿಯ ಆಟಿಗೆ ಎಂಬುದು ಈಗ ಗಮನಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂತು.
It surprised me completely. For one thing, because I didn't know that I was so closely related to our myths. Although I was, because of Circe, thanks to Circe, it had imbibed in me. That I didn't know. Secondly, I wanted to be an English poet. I wanted to go abroad and be with T.S. Eliot and Auden and so on, you know, win the Nobel Prize, that kind of thing. And the third thing is I wanted to be a poet, not a playwright. And suddenly this play just poured out like that. It was pouring out. I was writing it down in Kannada. And I was like a stenotypist.
ನೀವು ನನ್ನ ಬಲಗೈಯನ್ನು ಹಿಡಿದಿದ್ದೀರಿ. ನಾನು ಕೇವಲ ದಾಸಿ.
Before leaving for England, I went to Manohar Granthmala and I gave him the G.B. Joshi, the play. And I said, here I have a play, can you read it and let me know? And he, of course, graciously enough said, I'll take it home, read it. After 4 or 5 days, I came back and said, have you read it? And he returned it to me and said, yes, I've read it. You know, that Dasya monologue, that maid's monologue in the last act, that's very touching, he said. That's it. That was the comment on the whole play. Now, the Dasya's monologue is in the corner of the play, not the main theme at all. So I assumed that, well, that's it. That's the end of the matter. My playwriting ends. So I left for England. In Oxford, there's no other world. What happens outside doesn't matter. You are a student, and that is it. You react to each other. You meet writers who are potential writers, politicians who are potential politicians. I really enjoyed those 3 years enormously. And of course, the Oxford Union, the fact I became a president of the Oxford Union, it took some trouble, was a great experience, because the Oxford Union is open to London, Parliament. You politicians come. People like Randolph Churchill, people like Sir Cyril Connolly, people like Richard Crossman, they all came, spoke, and I got to know them. And I got to know how India is seen by outside politicians, by intellectuals and so on. When I was at Oxford, in my first term sometime, I got a letter from Kirtinath Kutkuri. And he said, I've just talked to GB Joshi. GB Joshi says he read your play and he told me what you've done with it. And I think it's very exciting, the possibilities. So please send me the script. But he also made a clause. He said, I hope you are not like Eugene O'Neill. Eugene O'Neill uses all these myths for Freudian purposes. And I said, oh my God, because I was very influenced by Eugene O'Neill also. I loved him. So anyway, I rewrote Yayati, sent it to Manohar Gansmala. I got a letter saying, we like it, we'll publish it. It was published, and then once it was published, it got all kinds of response. It got very good response. I knew at that moment when Yayati got published that I was coming back. I was not staying in England anymore. I didn't want to be an English poet. I wanted to be in Kannada. While writing on drama, Kirtinath Kurkoti in one place said that we don't have any place which treat history as contemporary. And I said, why not? Why not? I mean, I needed a subject and I didn't. So I said, let me write a historical subject. Took out a book of history and started with Mohenjo-daro and read the history book, right down Mohenjo-daro, the Guptas and Mauryas, and right down. And when I came to 13th century, I came across the story of Tughlaq. And I said, this is it, marvelous. I've found the subject. Again, with Tughlaq, it was not just that he was a mad king, a person who took the capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, but he was a king who banned public prayer in his kingdom for 5 years. Now, think of a sultan banning public prayers. He was going against the Holy Quran. He was going against his priests. Why should he have done it? So when I was going to Oxford, I was writing Yayati. On the way back from Oxford, I was writing Tughlaq. So I had the first draft ready as I reached Bombay. Tughlaq turned me into a kind of all-India figure. It was done in Bombay by Alec Padamsee. It was done by Alkazi there. It was done in Marathi by Arvind Deshpande. It was done in Bengali by Shambhu Mitra. Mention it. I mean, here by Simha. I must say that many things in my plays came from these casual conversations. One day Karant and I were sitting and I was telling him the story of transposed heads, Thomas Mann's story, and said, this will make a marvelous film, heads changing and so on. He said, Yakre, film yake, ಒಳ್ಳೆ ನಾಟಕ ಆಗತ್ತದು, masks use ಮಾಡಿ. And I said, quite right, he's just right. So I wrote Hayavadana.
ಕಪಿಲ, ನಮ್ಮ ಇಬ್ಬರಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಕತ್ತಿ ಯುದ್ಧ ಮಾಡಬಲ್ಲರು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಈಗ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ನನಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತು.
Ramanujan arranged for me to come to Chicago as a Fulbright scholar. At that time, there was also a condition that I should write a play, a fresh play, for the students of Chicago University, English department. And then Ramanujan told me the story of two stories he told me. One which I turned into a film called Cheluvi, and then he told me the story of Nagamandala, and I wrote it out. I just wrote it for the undergraduates. But this is what I mean. A play, writing a play is like having a child, You can say this is the future I want for it, but they don't listen to you. They just go off on their own. Nagamandala has become a hugely successful play.
কিন্তু
কি কিন্তু?
না না কিছু না।
ও, তোমার সব কথায় তো কিন্তু কিসের, কি হয়েছে বলো না?
তুমি তো ওকে কালকে পাহারা দেওয়ার জন্য নিয়ে এলে।
When you're building a house, you say this is where the kitchen will come, this is where the gate will come, this is where the main road is, this is where dust will come, and so on. A play has to be planned like that. I work, chip and chisel, because I think on stage, a little look like that can suggest so much. The play that I really wanted to write, which I worked on at Chicago, did a lot of work, was Taladanda and Agnimat Malai. Because there were all these sociologists, professors. You could discuss with them Taladanda, what happened in Taladanda, what was the caste system. At that time, the Mandir and Masjid thing was taking place here. On one side, the Mandir people saying Hinduism is one and we must be saved, and the masjid, the masjid episode, Babri Masjid, and also the the Mandal Commission report, all that was happening. What is Hinduism? What's not Hinduism? And I felt, God, we have not changed at all. We have remained the same for the last 1,000 years, because these are the issues that Basavanna handled.
What will the John Company gain in land and gold and silver by harming my sons? There is no danger of that. The danger is they will teach my children their language, English, a language in which it is possible to consider boys of 7 and 8 as hostages of war.
Well, I directed one play of mine, only one, and that's Vadakal Bimba. And that is because I thought if I didn't direct it, no one will know what the form is. There's the image and there's the real person, and the real person talks to the image. And everyone said, image? What image? Some other actress will come there. I said, no. It has to be an image. So ultimately, me and Chaithanya and we all sat together and, we did it.
ವಾರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ 1.5 ಲಕ್ಷ ಶಬ್ದಗಳ ಬರವಣಿಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ 10,000 ಶಬ್ದಗಳ ರಚನೆ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ನಿನಾದ ಶಬ್ದಗಳ ನಿಲ್ಸು, ಸಾಕ್ಸು ನೀರು. ಒಪ್ಕೋತೀನಿ, ನಾನಾ ಕಾದಂಬರಿ ಬರೀಲಿಲ್ಲ, ನನ್ನ ತಂಗಿ ಬರೆದಳು.
In 1969, Karnad wrote the screenplay of Samskara based on a novel by U.R. Ananthamurthy, yet another prominent Kannada writer. Karnad even donned the lead role in the film. It was his first foray into the world of cinema. Along with B.V. Karant, Vamshavruksha was his debut as a film director. Since then, he has directed some of the most memorable films in Kannada, including Kadu, ಒಂದಾನೊಂದು ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ, ತಬ್ಬಲಿಯು ನೀನಾದೆ ಮಗನೆ, and ಕಾನೂರು ಹೆಗ್ಗಡತಿ. Working alongside filmmakers like Satyajit Ray, Shyam Benegal, and Govind Nihalani, Girish Karnad made his presence felt in the Hindi film industry as well.
आप कौन है?
He has directed films in Hindi like Utsav, Chelavi, and Voghar. Most importantly, some of the most reputed talents in Indian cinema first entered films under Girish Karnad. The Kannada superstar Vishnuvardhan made his debut in Girish Karnad's Vamshavruksha.
You idiot! ಮತ್ತೇನು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕಣ್ಣೀರು ಹಾಕ್ಬೇಕಾ?
Karnad even introduced the immensely talented actor-director Shankar Nag in the film ಒಂದಾನೊಂದು ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ. Actors Amrish Puri, Om Puri, Shekhar Suman, Sonali Kulkarni, cinematographer Rajiv Menon, art director Sabu Cyril, all first entered cinema under Karnad's wing. Girish Karnad has also played an important role in shaping the cultural policy of India. He has built and nurtured several institutions of repute, including the Karnataka Natak Academy, the Sangeet Natak Academy, the Film and Television Institute of India, and the Nehru Centre in London. And his contributions have been recognized across India and the world. He has been conferred with reputed honors like the Kalidas Samman, Gubbi Veeran Award for Lifetime Achievement in Kannada Theatre, Swarna Kamal, Central Sahitya Academy Award, Padma Shri, and Padma Bhushan. Girish Karnad has been conferred with the most important literary honor in India, the Jnanpith, for his contribution as playwright. Karnad's wife, Saraswati Ganapati, is a doctor and social activist. She works to empower women in rural Karnataka. Karnad has 2 children, Raghu Amai and Radha Shalmali.
Close to the temple Someshwara is the source of the river Shalmali. This is it, Shalmala Nadi, she's called. And when my daughter was born, I said to my wife, why call her after Ganga, Yamuna, Narmada, Saraswati, rivers which are far away? We should call her after a river which is next door to us. And Saraswatpur, where I was brought up, is just next door here. And Someshwara is there. And in the poem, Sanna Swamara, which I quoted while we were in Someshwara, there are these lines of Bendres, which are very famous. Shalmali, Sanna Bali, Kiviyolaga, Talewali, Gari Gari Banadaga Adagi. ಗಂಗಾ ಹೊಳೆಯಾಗಿ ಸಾಗರ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಸಾಗರಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಹೊರಟಾಳ ಗೋಕರ್ಣ ಕಡೆಗೆ ಬೂರಲ ದೀಪಮಾಲಿ ನಂದಿಸಿ ಸಜ್ಜಿಸಾಲಿ ಗತ್ತಿನ ಸಪ್ಪುಳಿಲ್ಲದ ನಡಿ. When my mother was expecting me, when she was 2 months pregnant, probably 2 or 3 months pregnant, she decided that she didn't want me. She didn't want to have another child. She already had 3. So she persuaded my father to take her to a person, to a doctor, to have a abortion. A doctor called Dr. Madhumalati Gune, and I think I shall forever be grateful to this Dr. Madhumalati Gune, because that day Dr. Madhumalati Gune didn't come to her clinic. So my mother waited half a day and then she got bored and they came home. And so my mother said, we had you, otherwise we would have got rid of you. And I was so shocked, the whole notion that there would be this world without me. I mean, all blank. I felt completely blank, and my first reaction was to say, but then you have my younger sister. How can you have my younger sister if you wanted to get rid of me? And my mother said, oh, by that time I had lost interest, in the whole thing. So we had a younger sister. But I tell you that when that revelation came, for about 5 minutes, the whole notion that the world could exist and I could not be there just completely stunned me. And recently I told this story to my children and they were equally stunned. They said, what, the whole world would have been there and we wouldn't have been there. So the point is that it was a traumatic experience when I think I genuinely experienced the absurdity of life.
Words cannot adequately express how much we enjoyed the video, the documentary that you made on Karnad. It was a journey. What a journey. Okay, I don't think I've ever enjoyed any journey in my life as much as I enjoyed this journey into, Girish Karnad's life, his career, his works. What a thoroughly enjoyable and memorable journey that was. Chaithanya, would you like to speak to the girls first before we take some questions from them?
Well, as I said before, we had decided from the beginning that this documentary should be about Mr. Karnad talking about Mr. Karnad, and that's why we had very little voiceover, except to give some basic details. Most of it is Mr. Karnad talking, and it was a great advantage that it was him. Mr. Karnad, when we were shooting this documentary, mentioned a documentary that he had made of Bendre, and Govind Nihalani shot that documentary. And as I said, I made Mr. Karnad do every take twice, once in Kannada and once in English, so that I could shoot this for my documentary. And he was very patient, and he did. He kind of cooperated with all my requests. So when I was making this, he told me about his experience while shooting for a documentary on Bendre. And so there was this shot in the Bendre documentary that Karnad made, where Bendre calls out to a monkey, and the monkey comes, and Bendre gives it a few nuts to eat, and it eats, and it goes back up the tree. Govind Nihalani, who was the cameraman, asked Karnad, "Can you please ask Mr. Bendre to do it once again?" By then, Bendre and Karnad had shot 3 days for the documentary, and Karnad knew that Bendre might be irritable. He must have got bugged being in front of the camera for 3 days. However, he went and asked Bendre, "Can you call that monkey down again?" And then Bendre is supposed to have said, "Girish, that is a monkey. This is Bendre. That is not Bendre to do whatever you ask it to do." And he said that to kind of tell me how I had made him do various things again and again. and how it was an advantage that he was an actor and he could repeat those things on camera. So that's one small anecdote I wanted to share. You are free to ask me questions. I'll speak more about the film as I answer your questions.
Yes, yes, Chaitanya. Before we take any questions from our students, I would once again like to tell you how much we appreciate it. And if anybody had any doubts or questions as to what is there in this documentary made on Karnad that would have fetched the maker a Central Sahitya Academy Award, National Award. If anybody had any doubts or questions in their mind, all those doubts and questions would have been quieted. It was indeed, a superb documentary, an excellent documentary. And our girls, as I told you in my mail to you, they are doing, and also in the introduction, they are doing Hayavadana. In the current syllabus, they do Hayavadana in the 4th semester as part of their Indian literature paper. So, the glimpses, the kind of insights, the kind of incidents that you chose, though, a very new perspective of a documentary, allowing the person to speak instead of a third person narration, that also, has given some insights to our girls about the stylistic aspect, a first person narration, second person narration, third person narration. So they are, some knowledge they have of stylistics and the narrative style, the narrative voice. And so, your unique narrative style that you adopted for this documentary, making Karnad speak for himself. But even then, though you made Karnad speak, the kind of, facets, the kind of aspects, the kind of glimpses, the kind of little incidents that you chose to highlight in the, documentary on Karnad, kudos to you. All credit goes to you, Chaitanya. So, first of all, the narrative style, and then, the incidents that you have chosen, the glimpses, it was such an enriching and enjoyable, very rare that something, both the E's should come together, or even 3 E's, enriching, entertaining, and enlightening. All the possible E's, can come here. It's very rare that we find a combination of all these. It was truly enriching, enlightening, entertaining, thoroughly entertaining. And your little anecdote just put the icing on the cake. Okay, we are ready to take some questions now. Chaitanya, can I ask you the first question from, this is from our student, but she has not mentioned the name and the class. Her question is, were there any aspects that you had to omit from the documentary because of time constraints? Because you said that, Naureen was telling me, in fact, that you had made the documentary for an hour and had to cut it short to some 22 or 20, close to 24 to 26 minutes. The loss is ours, not Central Sahitya Academy. The loss is ours. We lost out on, 30, 32 precious more minutes of what you had shot on Karnad. So our girls are curious. They want to know if, what aspects you had to omit because of time constraints, since there are so many different facets to Girish Karnad. Would you like to share some of the aspects that you were forced to omit? That is the question from one of our students.
So I shot 3 hours of actual footage of Mr. Karnad. Usually interviews happen with a person sitting in front of the camera, talking to the camera, or talking to an interviewee who's interviewer who's next to the camera. So I do have Vivek Shanbag talking to Mr. Karnad, which I've used. But more than that, I have a lot of bits of the interview where Mr. Karnad is walking and talking. So when I started the documentary, I started with Mr. Karnad walking. That was one of the biggest images that most South Bangaloreans have, because they keep saying, I saw Karnad walking in the morning here, I saw Karnad Mr. walking in the morning there. He used to be a avid walker. Early in the morning, he would start from his house in JP Nagar and walk all the way till Gandhi Bazaar and then come back. So I thought that is the image that we should go with. And so you have Karnad walking in the beginning of the film, and then you have him walking in Karnataka University, walking in Harvard, in various places, or sitting in the car and speaking. So I wanted to break the mold, the monotony of a person sitting on a chair and speaking. So I wanted to make even the interviews visual. That is one thing. So I shot around 3 hours of footage, and then I shot about 3 hours of interview. So I have totally 6 hours of material. My first cut of the documentary came up to 50 minutes, 55 minutes. And then Sahitya Academy told me that they cannot have a 55-minute documentary and that all documentary makers are asked to make just 22 minutes. So I said, I'll give you the rest of the, you can take the entire 55 minutes. I will not charge you extra for it. You can take it, because that's the time I need to capture a personality as vast as Mr. Karnad. But then the academy said, we understand, but you see, we are constrained by rules. If we relax it for you, then again somebody else will want to make a much larger documentary on somebody else. So I had to cut it down to 22 minutes. Some of the interesting things that I had explored in the ones that I had to omit. One of the most important things was that one of the appreciations that Mr. Karnad has got about his playwriting is his understanding of the women characters in his plays. And Vijaya Dabbe, a very famous critic, once noted that Mr. Karnad almost seems to be able to think like a woman when he writes those women characters, and she was fascinated how he could do that. And Mr. Karnad speaks about it in one of the interviews where I've cut. He says that he grew up with his cousins, 5 cousin sisters, and in the Indian family structure, it is that these cousin sisters at once were people that he had to protect as a brother, but they were also potentially people that he could marry because he was their maternal cousin, elder cousin. So he grew up with that dichotomy of being the protector and the lover, and he said that shaped how, and because of that he could interact with them very closely, and that gave him a lot of perspective about the anxieties and the inner turmoils of women, and also the fact that his mother was such a big influence on his life. He speaks about his mother here. He is just, he wrote a autobiography in Kannada first called Adartha Ayushya, which is then recently translated as This Life at Play by Srinath Perur. I recommend that all of you should read that. It's a very good autobiography. And in all those places, he mentions how important his mother's influence was on him. And so Mr. Karnad's feminist outlook and his understanding of female characters comes from that background.
Thank you, Chaithanya. A couple of questions more if you're ready to take, if you're not too tired after all those technical hitches and glitches, if you're ready to take a couple of questions more. One is, what aspects of, this is from our student, what aspects of Karnad's personality impacted you the most? Having lived and worked with him so closely, what aspects of his personality impacted you?
The biggest thing that I noticed about him was that he looked at everyone as an equal. In Kannada, we have a singular and plural when we speak to people, right? So we say Ninu or we say Nivu to people based on their age or whatever. But Mr. Karnad used to address everybody in plural. I was far younger than him, but he used to address me as Nivu and not as Ninu. Only when he felt very affectionate once in a while that Ninu would slip out of his mouth, but he would try to call me Nivu all the time. And he insisted that I should call him Girish and not Sir, something that I could not manage. I always continued to call him Sir. But most people much younger than him used to address him by first person, and that is how he wanted it. Most importantly, you could disagree with him very freely. You didn't have to hold back. You didn't have to worry about the fact that here's this genius, this Gnanpith winner, this great Padma Shri achiever, that you shouldn't counter him. You could at any point disagree with him. You could at any point present your point of view, and he would listen to you, and if you were right, he would take it. And I grew up thinking that in a film, because I worked as an assistant director, associate director, I grew up thinking that the director is the be-all and end of cinema. But I realized how he used to work with extremely talented directors of photography, music directors, editors, and so on, actors, and he would take everybody's inputs. It would not be that my word is final. A cinematographer could dispute him. Some important, this doesn't work. Act different ways of doing things. So I learned how to be a democratic leader in a team from him, and that has really helped my journey personally. That is that's another aspect, and the third aspect is that he was always forthright and outspoken. He never held back. He never expected you to hold back. He never expected you to be a yes master, and he refused to be a yes master or somebody who would conform to what the society or the government wanted from him. He never held back, and he always spoke his mind. That kind of honesty and integrity are something that I've seen, greatly admired, and I aspire at some point to reach that level.
Thank you, Chaithanya. A very avid theatre lover among our students has, in fact, two questions. One is your advice to students as theatre students, your advice to any ideas, any advice, any suggestions to our students, who are interested in theatre, studying theatre students. And one interesting question is, in your line of work, has there been any documentary or work that you couldn't show the world? If there is, which documentary have you made which you still haven't been able to show?
As far as advice is concerned, I'll quote again Mr. Karnad about this. Once I asked Mr. Karnad, just before I was supposed to start my first, there was this 3 novels that Mr. Karnad was given by Doordarshan to turn them into mini series. One was Chidambara Rahasya by Tejasvi, Purnachandra Tejasvi, and one was Kusma Bale by Devanuru Mahadeva, and Om Namo by Shantinath Desai. Karnad chose to do Chidambara Rahasya by Tejasvi, and he asked me to do the other 2 novels. So before that, I went and asked him, what is your advice? How do you think I should approach this subject? He said the best advice is no advice. Because he said that the generation I come from, what I have seen, and the generation you come from are different. So whatever I advise you will come from the baggage that I have seen and I have experienced, which might not at all be relevant to you. You have to do things, make mistakes, not be afraid to make mistakes, understand that you're capable of making mistakes and not be ashamed about it, and learn from those and make better. So that is the advice I would give you also. I would say that, don't take advice, do your work, learn from your mistakes. Mistakes are bound to happen. That is what theatre is about. When you do plays, when you do performing arts, you will often get things wrong. And every time you get things wrong, you learn to do better. That is one thing. The other thing is, from this very documentary, Mr. Karnad speaks about writing, and he says it is such a amount of hard work. A lot of us settle for our first draft. We think that we have written something and that is the end. It is ready. But as Mr. Karnad quotes Ramanujan in this documentary, he says that the first draft is only a point of departure. That is when the real hard work begins. Once you finish your first draft, you have to rewrite. You have to structure it correctly. You have to look at it again. You have to show it to different people, and only then will it become the final piece. As far as the documentary that I wanted to make or couldn't make, there is a documentary that I made as a student when I did my master's. As part of my project, I had to make a documentary, and I made a documentary on the Hussain Sagar Lake in Hyderabad and how it got encroached. Unfortunately, in those days, I had no skills of filmmaking. So though I had all the concept in my head, and I tried to present it. The way it finally came out wasn't what was desired. If at some point I get the chance, I would like to go back and do that documentary on Hussain Sagar and present the many facets of that case.
Thank you, Chaithanya, for so patiently answering that question. Two small questions, if you're not too tired. One is, which one is among all Karnad's, memorable characters? Which one would you rate as your most favorite character, and would you like to do a documentary on that, on the character?
That's a tough one. There are many. I mean, I love all his plays. But the character that I want to make a documentary on, unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever be able to make. There are two plays that Mr. Karnad wrote, which never got, which got published just one print, and then he stopped them from being printed again. One was Manishada, a play that he disowned. There was another play called Anju Mallige, which he wrote. Now, if you go to the collected plays of Mr. Karnad, that doesn't figure anywhere. He hasn't published it in his collective works. The reason being that Anju Mallige is the closest that Karnad wrote to an autobiography. Of course, he wrote an autobiography later, but in Anju Mallige there is a character which resembles Karnad a lot, and it shows the anxieties and the confusions of a young person growing up in England and wondering whether he has to go back to India, stay in England, his love affair there, his attitude towards the West, all that comes through in Anju Mallige. Luckily, Mr. Karnad translated that play later in English. It is called Driven Snow. But I am yet to find out if that is going to be published. But I have the rights for that play. At some point, I might make it into a feature film.
Well, it would be a great enrichment to the film and theatre industry if you did make a film on that, Chaithanya. Please do seriously give it a thought. We would, love to watch, whether it is in a play form, documentary form, film. It will be an enriching experience. So I do wish and hope and wish that you do make the film or documentary or play. One interesting question from one of our department members. What was Karnad's response to the documentary that you made on him?
Well, Mr. Karnad was kind of like a father in some ways. He used to like everything I did. Sometimes I would not like things that I did, but he would say it is very, very wonderfully made, excellent work. And that was very rare. Mr. Karnad was quite a harsh critic otherwise. About this documentary, I will just mention one thing, and that I think, more than saying what he thought, that I think sums it up. He was sitting at this pond near Someshwara, and I told Mr. Karnad, sir, you told me an incident that happened when you won the Padma Shri, when your parents spoke about wanting to have you aborted before when your mother was pregnant with you. He said, "Oh, leave that. Why do I have to talk about my personal stuff? That's too personal." So I said, "No, sir. I think it's very important that it's very amusing. It is very important that you speak about it. I want to have it somewhere in my documentary." And then he said, "You really think people will, is it really relevant?" I said, "Yes, it is. Can you please speak about it?" And so he spoke about how there was this Dr. Madhumalati Gune, who was a gynecologist, and she wasn't at the clinic when his parents went there to have him aborted. And thanks to her, he was born. And I put it at the end of my documentary. But to my surprise, 2 years later, when he wrote his autobiography, he began his autobiography with that incident. The incident which he said that I need not use in my documentary, which he thought might not be relevant to the audience. He, in fact, started his autobiography with that incident, and he dedicated that autobiography to this Dr. Madhumalati Gune, who was the gynecologist who was absent and hence he was born. So that, I think, kind of sums up what he felt about the documentary.
One more very perceptive question from our students, one of our students. How much have you had to change yourself with changing times, okay, changing perceptions? How much have you had to change yourself as, a filmmaker, documentary maker, theatre person, theatre personality? How much have you had to change yourself? And is it necessary for one to change oneself according to the times, or stick to your principles? Or I assume that is what our student meant. I've just fleshed out her question a little more.
I have changed quite a lot, and I think everybody changes. If you have to survive in this film industry, you have to keep evolving. You have to keep learning new things. You have to keep reading up, updating yourself, and that is a positive aspect of change. But there's another part of me which has changed, which I am not very happy about, which is that unlike Mr. Karnad and his time, when differences of opinion were not really frowned upon, in my generation, I feel that I cannot be as outspoken as his generation was, because he could speak and he wouldn't have to face, his films would not have been banned, or he wouldn't have been threatened. I mean, he was, of course, threatened with death and all those things, but he wasn't banned. His films were not boycotted by society and so on. But in today's time, if you dare to speak or be too outspoken, I have a chance of making a loss for my producer. I have a chance of making a loss for the network that is taking my films. So people are more pushed towards silence in my generation than Mr. Karnad's generation was. That's the unfortunate part of change. The positive aspect is, yes, that technology has grown. There's all sorts of experiments happening in the industry, and I'm trying to keep myself updated to it.
Thank you, Chaithanya. I don't think there are any more questions. So before I hand the mic over to my colleague Satya to propose the vote of thanks, I would just like to say how much we have enjoyed both the documentary and the interaction with you, and it has been worth the wait. Okay, though it was about an hour that we had to wait due to technical glitches, it was worth every second of that 1 hour that we waited. It was worth it. Thank you so much. May I now request Ms. Satya to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Jyotinivas College, I would like to extend my gratitude to Shri K M Chaithanya for an invigorating and informative session. Thank you so much, sir. My heartfelt gratitude extends to our principal and chief patron, Dr. Sister Lalita, for all her encouragement and support. I would like to also thank our head of the department, Ms. Maya Harvey, under whose stewardship we conducted this event successfully. I wish to congratulate all my department members as well for their hard work in organizing this event. My gratitude also extends to faculty members from other departments who took the time and attended our event. And lastly, thank you to all our students for your enthusiasm and proactive participation, along with your immense patience in this event. Thank you. So students, please note, the feedback form link has been posted on the chat box. Please submit it before 3 p.m. It is also pertaining to your attendance. Thank you, one and all, once again. Thank you, sir.